Good afternoon. I'm Gretchen Crosby Sims, Executive Director here at the Institute of Politics. I'd like to welcome you all to our final Speaker Series event of the school year. It has been an exciting year at the Institute of Politics, with visits from U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations Nikki Haley, Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, and many more. We are very pleased to finish the year on a high note, partnering with a terrific team from Alumni Relations and Development, and welcoming these stellar members of the IOP Board of Advisors for a conversation with IOP Director David Axelrod on the upcoming midterm elections. Our programming will return when classes resume in October. The best way to stay informed about our programs is to sign up for our newsletter, which you can do at politics.uchicago.edu. We will take questions from the audience after our moderated conversation. There will be a microphone on the side. Please line up behind it. And the microphone's going to be over here. We will reserve, as always, the first 3 questions for students. We remind you that questions end in a question mark. And we ask you now to make sure that your phones are on silent. And here to formally introduce our speakers is Andrew Mamo. Andrew is a third-year public policy student from Katona, New York. He has served as CFO of the Chicago Maroon, and he has been the fantastic junior chair for this year's IOP's Student Advisory Board. Please join me in welcoming Andrew to the podium.
Thank you, Gretchen. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the last event in what has been a truly incredible year at the Institute of Politics. Today, I'm pleased to introduce members of the IOP's Board of Advisors for what should be an insightful discussion on the current political landscape and what we can expect in the 2018 midterms and 2020 presidential election. Joining us today are Bob Dole, former congressman from Illinois' 10th District, who served on the Financial Services and Ways and Means Committee and was known as one of the most independent and bipartisan members of Congress. Jennifer Granholm, former governor of Michigan, who supported the 2016 Clinton campaign through her work as co-chair of Priorities USA, as well as senior advisor and campaign surrogate for Correct the Record. Larry Grisolano, political and advertising professional who served as director of paid media and opinion research for Obama for America and the Obama-Biden 2008 campaign. Shayla Murray, former senior advisor to President Obama and deputy chief of staff and communications director for Vice President Joe Biden, who also spent time on Capitol Hill as a correspondent for the Washington Post. And Mike Murphy, one of the Republican Party's most successful consultants, who has advised John McCain, Jeb Bush, and Mitt Romney among a host of high-profile politicians. Moderating today's discussion will be David Axelrod, former senior advisor to President Obama and director here at our Institute of Politics. Please join me in a round of applause for our panel.
Thank you, Andrew. You forgot the most important thing, class of 76. A lot of class of 76 people here. I want to start by talking briefly about the Senate. We all talk about the House in the midterm elections. We don't talk as much about the Senate, and I just want to set up the numbers and then invite a conversation about this. There are 35 Senate seats up. 26 of them are held by incumbents or Democrats, only 9 Republican seats. 10 of those Democrats have seats in states that Donald Trump won, 5 in states that he won overwhelmingly. Only 1 Republican incumbent in a state that Hillary Clinton won, Nevada, Dean Heller. I said this to Jennifer as we were sitting at lunch, and I said, I don't see much of a chance for Democrats to win the Senate. And you jumped me hard on that one.
Yeah. I don't know. Perhaps it is just my ridiculously always optimistic outlook from my party's point of view. But the Democrats have been overperforming in every one of these special elections. You have now a Democratic former governor, Phil Bredesen, running for Senate in Tennessee, which would be normally a state that you wouldn't think would be up for grabs. And he's running against Marsha Blackburn, who, you know, is not the moderate that Bob Corker is. You know, obviously you've got the Arizona seat that's vacant, which is not normally a state that would necessarily flip to the Democrats, but Kristen Sinema, who's running, has outpolled her opponents. And if Joe Arpaio is one of those opponents, then it's really going to be a trouncing. I know that there, Heidi Heitkamp, Joe Manchin, Bill Nelson in Florida, particularly concerned about Joe Donnelly in Indiana. But I just feel like this wave of enthusiasm is really encouraging. And I think there are more Democrats who are angry or upset than there are Republicans who are angry or upset. And therefore, I'm hopeful that there will be a Democratic wave that washes over the Senate as well as the House.
Well, Governor, if force of enthusiasm is a factor, and yours, I think, may make the difference there.
I'm sure, all on me.
Mike, what do you say about this? And my experience has been that states tend to go sort of tribal at the end.
Yeah.
And so, as good a candidate as Bredesen is in Tennessee,
yeah,
it's unlikely that he wins there, and that it's unlikely to believe that 10 Democrats in Trump states are all going to swim to shore.
Yeah.
But what is your sense of it?
Well, David, first of all, it's great to be here at the Trump fan club. We have a rally outside. I look out at the audience, it's like I'm dreaming through Sean Hannity's Nightmare Journal. Just don't charge, okay? I'm an anti-Trump Republican. So the secret Republican plan down in the Nixon vault under the headquarters was run up the Senate numbers this year, where we have the terrain advantage in these seats that Trump won with Democratic senators. Because in 2020, a lot of our folks are up in tough-to-win, lean Democratic seats. So that was the idea. What has happened is our opportunity was the question this year, I think, more than winning or losing it. And our opportunity to run up the numbers may be offset by what does look very much like a blue wave election coming. More perilous for the House. I don't think it's certain, but I think it is more likely than not the Dems will get a narrow majority there. In the Senate, I'm kind of with you. I think it goes tribal at the end, but instead of racking up net 4, we may only rack up net 1 or wash or even go down 1 to have a 50-50 deal. So what the blue wave may do, there's an outside chance we could lose the Senate. It is not impossible. But I think the most likely outcome is we lose the opportunity of a strategically very important victory to hold the place after 2020. Because the Republican theory was we have to hold it in 2020 because if things go really bad with Trump and we have a total Democratic president and a Democratic left-of-center House, Fort Capitalism becomes the Senate to stop bad stuff. That's now in play. So it's really a ramp up to 2020 in the Senate, in my view.
Larry, everybody's asserting this blue wave. You're doing a bunch of races out there. But there's been some shift since December when there was panic in the Republican Party. The generic ballot has narrowed. I think 538 now says it's a 6-point margin. The president's approval rating was in the 30s in December. It's now around 42, 43. Still not good. But any sense that the wave may be more of a trickle than a wave?
Well, I think the first thing is in a midterm election, there's the president's party almost always, almost without exception, is going to lose seats.
32 on the average, I think.
Right.
And it is higher when the president's approval is less than 50.
40 on the average, I think.
And then and then lower
Nice
when it's more than 50. But so you would say to yourself, geez, this guy's approval's been very low, a little better lately, but well below the 50% mark for the whole year.
But it's the greatest below 50 that there's ever been.
So you would say to yourself, this really looks like the makings of a wave. And I think the only thing that is would concern us about whether this is materializing is the fact that despite the fact that he's unpopular, presidents aren't usually unpopular when things are going pretty well. Just yesterday, these record employment numbers, by and large, we don't have the kinds of international concerns. He's doing his best to change that, but at the moment, we don't have the kinds of international concerns that would be reflected in people's satisfaction. So you could see where Democrats would be a little bit nervous about these historical trends and the president's popularity. That's an offset. But overall, I think we've got a big wave coming. The thing that makes me optimistic is these turnout numbers. What you saw in the off-year elections, we're about to have California next week. A lot of absentee ballots have already arrived. I think we're going to look at those and say that the partisan composition of the absentee ballots is showing us a big turnout for Democrats there. So I think that there's a lot of reasons to believe that this is going to be a very big wave.
Bob Dole, when Andrew introduced you, he said you were known as one of the most bipartisan members of the House, and I note that you're sitting here with us now. So.
Yeah, that's it's not that it's, we should hope more bipartisan members are out there, but
yeah, you lost your district in 2016 by 4 points, while Hillary Clinton was carrying your district by I think 32 points.
Yes,
which is quite an achievement.
It's an uphill battle, generally.
But let me ask you, because I know you're still in touch with your colleagues. There've been a fair number of Republican retirements. I think 40. I think including the Speaker, obviously. Is this a sign that there is a sense among the members that the 24 seat shift that Democrats need is going to happen?
Well, I think certainly, as you pointed out in December, I think there was a huge sense that it was not going to be not only not pretty, it was going to be downright ugly, potentially up to 80 seats lost, I think was what some people were talking about. And so a lot of folks, and again, a lot of these members don't really run tough races over and over and over again. They usually have a tough race up front, and then they, basically are in a mode where they're just not coasting, but basically are taking care of their constituents and have easier elections. And honestly, this is going to be a year where there's going to be very tough elections, far more than the 30, 35 seats generally. I think it's probably going to be closer to 70 of those seats are going to be far more targeted and competitive. And it's grueling. It can be exhausting. And I think a lot of members said, I'm not signing up for this.
Is it your assumption that Democrats will take the House?
I would have said almost a certainty back several months ago. It's obviously as the generic ballot is kind of narrowed, I think it becomes more up in the air, but I think more likely than not it goes to the Democrats, especially if those folks in these competitive seats don't distance themselves and actually try to localize their campaigns. If they try to run on a national ticket, I think it becomes far more difficult for these folks because I think there's a lot of those independent or moderate type voters that it will look for a check and balance on 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue.
Is that possible? Is it possible to? You didn't endorse Donald Trump for president.
I did not. But the ads would say otherwise,
A lot of the. Yeah. Any remorse about that?
No remorse.
A lot of the sort of most competitive districts are in suburban areas. You represented a suburban area. What are the pressures on these Republican members in the era of Trump?
I think the pressure is that they're all kind of concerned about the next tweet. They're not able to go out and talk about the issues and concerns that the constituents have or what the agenda that they're trying, whether it be the opioid crisis or how are we talking about jobs or what are we doing to deal with the poverty crisis we have in the country. It's all about the tweet and it's all about what do you think about Donald Trump doing X, Y, or Z. And so it becomes, you have to deal with this.
This goes to Larry's point that given the economic numbers, you'd expect both his numbers and the generic number to be stronger than it is. But this is all a lot about him as a person.
I do think so. I think that if you look at some of the things that have happened and you look at, again, the unemployment numbers, you look at labor force participation, you look at the overall economy, people will generally be more favorable, which is why I think the generic number is come to where it is. It's the rhetoric and where people are just have a reaction like that's not what we're used to nor something that we find acceptable. And that's why I think you've got a visceral reaction to folks because honestly, I think the vast majority of the country is looking for solutions and generally don't react well to what they see coming out of 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue in terms of the rhetoric, how he's treating people, how they see kind of the combativeness, the bullying, that sort of stuff.
And yet a lot of your old colleagues are pretty quiet about all that.
I think don't underestimate, that there is a base out there of people that are just downright angry with Washington and feel themselves saying enough. Whether it, again, there's the cost of education, all these other things that people are dealing with. Yeah, there's a huge frustration, and so they're trying to keep their head down as opposed to popping it up.
And Trump speaks for that base.
He does definitely speak to frustration and drain the swamp and whatever else that may be.
Well, there's a long discussion on how you define the...
Yeah, oh, no question.
But, Shayla, let me ask you, you covered Capitol Hill. I think you were there in 2006, were you not?
Yes, I covered
when the House
40,
turned over.
Yeah, I think I went to 40 different districts that year.
And there were a lot of retirements that year as well. That was one of the predicates for the takeover of the House.
A lot. The midterm elections, when I was a political reporter, were the most exciting ones to me because you really saw the country speak sort of organically about issues. In 2006, the big issue was the Iraq War, and that was the year that you saw the country kind of pivot away from the whole post 9/11 era, and I think it set up the President Obama odyssey. It wasn't surprising to any of us who covered that 2006 cycle that he emerged as the person to beat in 2008. So even if there's not a competitive race in your community, I encourage you all to pay attention this year because it will tell you a lot about where we're going a few years down the road. I think the big question for me this year as a former reporter, if I were a reporter covering this, is what about these Democrats, the Senate Democrat incumbents? I think those will be really interesting races because these special elections have brought a lot of people out of the woodwork, but those are open seats where incumbents, people who represent Washington, don't have to defend themselves. I think people like Claire McCaskill, Joe Donnelly, Bill Nelson, especially in Florida, running against a reasonably popular governor, those are going to tell us a lot about Democrats' enthusiasm for people who are already in office. And I think that's a big question down the road for some of these older, more established figures who want to run in 2020. So that's how I'm...
Another thing people can be looking at, Jennifer, is the role that women are going to play in this election and what auguries that may have for 2020. But talk specifically about the midterms and what you see. There's been this explosion of candidacies on the part of women, robust turnout, and so on.
Yeah, we're mad as hell, and we're not going to take it anymore. Yeah, I think that just as a data point on this. So in the House last cycle, this cycle there are I think 278 women who are running for a House seat, which is twice what it was in last cycle. There are 57 women who have raised their hands to say that I'm going to run for Senate. Again, almost twice what it was in the last cycle. There are 78 women who are running for governor, or at least raised their hand, over the course of this election season. I mean, it is just an explosion of women who are embarrassed, angry, you name it, and who feel like they have a responsibility to step up and help take their country back. And I think the women and progressive men and people who are just fed up, even independent thinking Republicans, are saying that a lot of times women have a little bit more trust, especially in this Me Too movement. So between in some places, I don't think this is everywhere, but in some places the gun issue, in some places the Me Too issue, and then the overall bread and butter issues that women often deal with on a daily basis, I think you're going to see this enormous push. And just one other piece of data on this, which I think is terrific. Some of you may have heard this because you're here and you're political junkies, but I love this stat, that at this time in the last cycle, Emily's List, who helps Democratic women, had about 900 women that they were helping who had reached out to them. This time in this cycle, it's over 30,000. From 900 to 30,000. Now, not all of those 30,000 are running, but they've all reached out and said, I want to run for something, some race, whether it's dog catcher or U.S. Senate. And that's super exciting. Go women.
I want you to know that Jennifer Granholm arrived in Chicago at 3 in the morning for our Board of Advisors meeting.
So I will
Can you
crash
imagine what she's like when she gets a full night's sleep? Larry, you were based in California for a long time, and you're doing a number of races out in California. And Murphy, you should jump in on this as well. Sure. I'm trying to figure out this crazy system you have there where the top 2 finishers win, because it's, despite the fact that there's all this momentum for Democrats out there, it feels like the system is threatening Democratic chances of winning seats, because so many Democrats are competing that it may open the door for Republicans to slip through in these primaries.
Well, the first thing I would say is it's as complicated as this is at this moment for Democrats. I really like the system. It is designed to create a constituency for a moderate, so you don't have only the most liberal Democrat or the most conservative Republican coming out of the nominating contest.
Yeah.
So that
crazy was not the right word.
A lot of things in California are crazy.
That, but this isn't one of them. Right?
In this case, what's happened is you have a lot of enthusiastic candidates, as Jennifer pointed out. We have in some of the targeted congressional races, 3 women and the 48th I can think of. So you have all these candidates who've come out of the woodwork because they're very enthusiastic and interested this year. And what that does is it splits up the Democratic vote, and you have the chance that if Republicans are more consolidated, and they do tend to be a little better internally organized than we are, that the Republicans can get 2 candidates through, and it becomes a Republican on Republican general election.
So, for example, Dana Rohrabacher, who is thought to be really vulnerable candidate, Moscow's man in the House.
So he's an incumbent, and usually in this situation, the incumbent would eat up all the, in this case, Republican votes. He would get all of his party or her party. Because Rohrabacher is so weak, the good news is he's vulnerable to Democrats, he's vulnerable in the general election, but in the primary he's not soaking up all the vote. There's another person who is taking a bunch of votes. There's a lot of Democrats, none really jumping way ahead of the rest, and so those Democrats could end up in 3rd place behind Rohrabacher and a guy named Scott Baugh, who could get 2nd place.
Mike,
I think it's a great system. We ought to have it everywhere, because here's why. No. I mean, the Dems are whining in California because under the old system, you have like an idiot Republican who gets in trouble in a Republican district. So this time, maybe, miracle, the Democrat could win and we pick up a district. Hooray. And 2 years later, new Republican beats that Democrat because it's a Republican district. What the California thing does, puts everybody on one ballot and the top 2 win. So what happens in a Republican district? You now may very well have the choice between 2 Republicans. The hardcore Republican and the hybrid Republican, or at least somebody trying to get some non-base votes. And a Democratic deal, instead of being trapped between, if I'm a Republican, like I live in a communist district in Los Angeles. So my choice is either Gus Hall, see if anybody gets that joke, some of our comrades here.
These are my choice appropriate references.
Yeah, I thought it would work here. My choice is between a hardcore left-wing public employee, labor union-controlled Democrat, or a Republican with an aluminum foil on their hat, who's going to lose. So now under the new system, I got a choice between 2 Democrats, the socialist and the moderate. It makes independent and minority by ideology voters in districts more powerful, and it brings the market closer to the voters. So net, it's a pretty good thing. Though this year, it's letting weak Republicans in Republican districts, okay, have other Republicans replace them rather than a card trick to have a one-term Democrat there. So it is, in effect, as David and I think Larry both indicated, not so good for this year for easy wins. But remember, if it were Dana, who is like the horrible Republican, I hope loses, but if he were beat by a Democrat, the odds are that Democrat would be gone in 2 years. And whoever won the Republican primary in California, which means whoever ran on arresting the most illegal immigrants, would probably take the district. That's not progress. So I actually think it's an important reform. I wish we had it everywhere.
Shayla, explain, as someone who covered the Congress, what control of the House would mean. How would the world look on January 7th or whenever the new Congress was sworn in, and presumably Speaker Pelosi, although we should talk about that. No, seriously, that's an issue, and we should talk about, but I'll get back to it. How different would Donald Trump's world be on January 7th if Democrats win the House?
You know, it's hard to overstate how different it would be. It would be utterly different in two ways, important ways. One is accountability. There's no accountability whatsoever for this administration. I served for 6 years in the Obama administration under Republican-run Congress the entire time, and we were afraid to open a Coke can under threat of some oversight hearing or some. I mean, it was way on the other end of the spectrum, but that was the climate, and it generally forces people to operate on the level and in the best interests of the people they're representing. So that's obviously not part of the deal right now. I think we see the consequences for it in many different ways, and primarily in this sort of abject lack of responsibility and the basic execution of government. So that would automatically change, and you would, and the other thing that would change that's connected to that is you would suddenly see a Democratic agenda materialize. I mean, people say, oh, the Democrats don't stand for anything. They don't have any issues. They, are just running against Trump, and this whole specter of impeachment obviously reinforces that. But once the House is so pure in its the way it's structured, and as Bob knows, the way the rules work, that you control it, you have absolute control of everything that happens, unlike in the Senate, and so you can actually run ideas through the system and produce actual pieces of legislation with relative efficiency, and that would automatically, I think, cause new blood to emerge. You would see there's a lot of fantastic young members of Congress on the Democratic side. It would give them a platform for their ideas and a whole new generation of leadership to emerge. It would, just look at the small slice of that we get from the Russia oversight, and you see people like Adam Schiff and Eric Swalwell, like very bright, relatively young members emerging as voices. You would see that across the board in every issue area. So that would be a good thing from my side, especially with these young folks.
What is the danger, Jennifer? Let me put it this way. What Republicans now they are trying to nationalize the race, despite what you suggest, and you're probably right about it, but the suggestion is they're just going to go right to impeachment. It's going to be, gridlock. All this good stuff we're getting done is not, is going to come screeching to a halt. And you're going to have to deal with Speaker Pelosi again. And let me just stipulate, much of what was done in the first years when I was there were done because Nancy Pelosi was such an effective leader, and she's very effective within those four walls. She's also, after years of combat, kind of a mixed blessing for candidates out there, and she's being used against candidates out there. But is there a danger of Democrats going too far, or at least fear of Democrats going too far?
Sure. Nancy Pelosi will be the first one to say that she's not in favor of impeachment. We're not talking about impeachment. These should be local issues. These should be on the ground issues. I understand everybody's desire to see fresh leadership, new leadership. Honestly, she was the most effective Speaker of the House, I feel like, in my lifetime. For the very brief moment that she was Speaker of the House. People think she was Speaker of the House for years. She was, if you recall, Al Franken wasn't seated until, June or July, and then Ted Kennedy dies in August. She was Speaker of the House for a very brief moment. And what happened? the largest piece of legislation, in decades. Of course, the Affordable Care Act was passed, the Recovery Act, which was no small shakes. I mean, we saved the auto industry, huge investments in energy, all under Nancy Pelosi. So I say that just to say that I'm not one who says she should go, and my hair gets up a little bit when I see such an effective woman who appears to be such a threat, and everybody wants to take her out, and she's super effective. But
we hope she doesn't go either. we hope she stays wherever she's at.
I hear you. I mean, I'm not sure, what the beef is, but anyway, other than she's effective. But but my concern is if we take back the House, it's not about impeachment. There's not going to be impeachment unless Mueller comes back with something that's overwhelming, right, and that shames everybody, Republicans and Democrats. I mean, impeachment proceedings, et cetera, the conviction has to happen in the Senate anyway, and you have to have 2/3. I mean, that's not going to happen. But my concern is you take back the House, and nothing gets done, and then Trump blames the House and the Democrats, and then the pendulum swings the other way in 2020. And that is a concern of mine.
So you're voting Republican?
No. No.
Murphy, you had your hand
It's
up.
just a caution.
But here's the hard politics dilemma of it. If the Democrats win the House, a lot of it will be because of intensity. Their casual voters who normally only vote in the presidential year, and there are about 30 million of them, show up in the off year and vote to punish the president. I'll bet there's, and that energy is the key to winning the House. So quick voluntary poll question. How many of you think the president is probably vulnerable and should be vulnerable to impeachment? Oh, come on. All right, secret ballot. My point being that impeachment energy exists in the very motor that is driving the super democratic intensity to maybe win the House. And while the crafty political strategy is to never talk about it until after the election, you don't want to tamp down that energy either. It's a conundrum for the Democratic campaigns because their troops want more blood than they strategically think they should do. But if they tamp that thing down, they start losing that energy. Remember, the one difference about these historical numbers, about 30 seats, 40 seats, is the seats are more locked in now. We don't have a lot of swing seats anymore. Yeah. So the Republicans have more of a fortress around these seats than was true 20 years ago.
Yeah.
Until we get more governors elected and we can redistrict in a fair and normal way.
May take a while.
Can I add? You never lost an election, did you?
Me?
Yeah.
Never once.
Yeah. Go ahead.
The one thing I would say about this, what's happening is we talk about this wave election, and we always think about it in partisan terms. Now a bunch of Democrats are going to come in. But if you think about what Governor Granholm said a moment ago with these 30,000 women who all decided to run, these aren't people who get to run because it was their turn, right? These are people who are going to bring a very fresh perspective to the U.S. House. And I think it's a big deal, and I think they're going to make a big mark on this institution. Not just the women, but all of the new members are coming in with a very different mindset. And I think that it's not disrespectful to former Speaker Pelosi to say, they're going to be looking, they're going to be judging by a different standard. They're going to be looking for something fresh and different, and I think that's going to put pressure on her within the caucus. But the bigger issue is I think that they're going to bring reforms. I think they're going to think about things differently.
Millennials, right?
Yes.
Millennials who are running.
There's a lot of young people running, a lot of people coming out of professions and nonprofits and high levels in the government who never had run in the past. They're just not the state representative who it's their turn to send to the next office. And I think they're going to bring a very different perspective, and it's going to be really helpful for the country.
As someone who runs an Institute of Politics that's devoted to try and encourage young people to get into the public square, I share your enthusiasm, but I have a cynical former political consultant question for you, which is there a danger of too much democracy in this process to the point that you get candidates who appeal to the base and make it harder to win a seat? There was a primary in Nebraska, for example, just recently, in which a very progressive first-time candidate fit all the descriptions that you just laid out, narrowly won a primary, defeated a former member of Congress, which goes to your point. That may have been enough to defeat her opponent. And now a seat that was viewed as a likely Democratic pickup is considered less likely. Maybe unfairly, we'll find out, but how concerned are you about that?
Well, I mean, there is, I mean, as Mike was alluding to, when you go to the local resistance meeting, you get a different impression of what will motivate people than when you poll even Democratic primary voters. And so there is a concern that the people who are most energetic and who are most active in the nominating process are pushing people to the left. And I think that's a concern, although I think that by and large, when you look at who's emerged from these primaries, it's not lopsided to those, to the more kind of activist candidates. Sure, you're going to lose some here or there, but you're also going to get some people who are going to push the envelope in districts that you otherwise wouldn't have.
Jennifer, there is an expectation that Democrats are going to take the House. I think it's broadly held. There's a lot of enthusiasm on the part of Democratic voters to win back the House. What happens if the day after the election we wake up and Republicans are still in control of the House? And
oh my God, it's going to be like the day after the election in 2016. Oh.
No, but
yeah,
I'm trying to look ahead to what that would, from a morale standpoint, what it would mean, and then I want to ask you guys what it would mean for the Republican Party.
Why do you ask me this horrible question? Yeah, I mean, it would be horrible.
You're too damn upbeat.
I know, you got to bring it down, man. I would say that, you know, there is a sense inside of the Democratic Party, and I speak to a lot of Democratic groups, that you know, we felt like the rug was pulled out from under us in the election, and we were listening to all the pundits, and I was believing the polls. I'm a pundit, I know, but I'm not sure I really count. But I was, you know, reading Nate Silver in the New York Times. I was totally convinced on the morning of the election she was going to win. And so I worry myself about being too upbeat about the wave, the blue wave, because I don't want anybody to assume that because people are thinking that we're going to win, that people shouldn't be working. We should be scared as hell and working our tails off to get people to the polls. If we do all of that and we wake up and we still lose, I am going back to bed with a bottle of vodka. I just don't know what to say. I don't know what to say. It will be really depressing.
So the only people who will be rooting for that are Tito's, I guess.
Tito's.
Tito's will be excited.
You are an avowed and loud and proud never Trumper.
I've hated him since the 80s. I don't know where all these Johnny-come-latelys are, but yeah.
And I want to get to you as well, Bob. But I want to know, because you, as I pointed out, didn't endorse him. You've never embraced him as the standard bearer for the party. Mm-hmm. But it seems to me if he wins the House back, that he's going to be, it's going to be Trump times 10.
Yeah, no, and look, if I were a Dem, I'd be a little nervous because I'm hearing about an historic gender election. Wait a minute, Hillary, we tried that. What happened? Trump. So I would be looking for a message about middle-class economics, not identity politics. That's my free advice. Look, let's be honest about it. If we win the House, it'll be seen as the greatest Trump comeback in the history of comebacks in American politics. It'll be huge. He will be unbeatable in the party. He will be renominated for president. And there will be a massive, and I have to admit, on one level, for me as a partisan Republican for so many years, highly entertaining Democratic civil war that'll completely break out. And I think the odds are the hard progressives will say, enough. We've tried the smart way, and now we're going to do it our way. And so we could have Trump versus a Bernie, which will be the hair fight Olympics of all time, but a hard progressive in a crazy 2020 race. But no doubt Trump will get huge comeback cred, and his grip on the party will be tighter than now, and we'll all be run out of town as anti-Trumpers.
Bob, if it doesn't happen, and if the Democrats win the House, does that increase the likelihood that Trump will have a primary challenge? I mean, he seems strong within the party.
Well, I think he is with a base out there, and there's those ruby red districts where he's done really well. And I do think that he's going to get a primary challenge if he decides to run. And again, I've talked to you about this in the past, where I thought for a while he would come to the microphone in year 3 and say, I've been the greatest president this country's ever had. I've done more in 3 years than people have done in 8 or 12, and talk about all these things and say, you know, nobody thought I could win before, and I won, and if I decided to run this time, I could do it again, but drop the mic and walk off the stage.
From your mouth to God's ears.
Yeah. But I do think, listen, if the Republicans maintain the House, you are going to see the civil war within the Republican Party get completely taken over by the Freedom Caucus to say, see, the American people want us to go further to the right. They want to take this agenda and we want to run with it. And the pushback is going to be enormous. And again, the Freedom Caucus their whole idea is to try to move the goalposts to get more conservative. I don't care what the bill is. You know, if they meet all the demands, they're still going to move it even further to the right. So I think that, again, if we wake up after the election and Republicans are able to hold on to the House, which is not beyond the realm of possibility, I think you're going to see a big group that is going to say, see, the American public want us to shift further to the right, and you're going to see a lot of angling to try to move the entire agenda to the right.
So you'll be with a blanket and the vodka too?
I'll send you a bottle.
We
I
might
don't
have
mean
some
in the
gin,
same
but-
place.
Listen,
Right.
I think
Thank you for clarifying.
All right, maybe we should stop right there. There's
We're out.
supposed to be a microphone somewhere for questions. It's right up there. Please line up if you have questions. We will, as was mentioned, prioritize students, and by students I mean active students, not alumni. Here we go. Ronan.
Bob, it's great to see you again, first of all.
Ronan, always great to see you, my friend.
So I'm a second year here in the college, and one of you mentioned the Russia investigation earlier and what the midterms might mean for that, and how the House is handling it in particular. And that's actually something that I'm pretty concerned about. It really bothers me that when you look at news coverage of what's going on with discussions about Russia, depending on where you're looking, it looks like people are living in different realities, you know, in terms of who's doing what that's inappropriate or what's against protocol. And in terms of the strength of our democracy, in terms of our cohesion as a democracy, I really just want people to be on the same page about addressing this breach of our national security instead of fighting each other about it. So
Ronan,
I'm wondering,
the question mark thing.
yeah, the question, no. So the question is, like, how do we resolve this? What can the Democrats do if the Democrats win to bring people in together to address this and to address the lack of cohesion and to make this a bipartisan question and answer?
I mean, we have bipartisan mechanisms that the House Intelligence Committee and the Senate Intelligence Committee operated for a very long time under exactly the principle you're talking about. And really the deviation is, and the Senate, by the way, is still operating under those rules. The deviation you're talking about is the Republican leadership. And I got to tell you, if there's anybody who thinks the Adam Schiff leading the House Intelligence Committee would be the same as Devin Nunes leading the Intelligence Committee, just on the basis of who's a fair actor, who's on the level, I don't see it that way. I think that switch would accomplish what you're asking for.
Shayla, you cover this stuff.
Yeah, I think this goes to the heart of really the existential crisis we're facing right now, which is the degradation of these institutions and how effectively they have collapsed over recent years for a whole variety of reasons. But this is a basic oversight function, one of the most basic functions that Congress performs, and it's the utter dereliction of duty we've seen unfold over the last year or so goes to the heart. I mean, it's exactly what's happening in the oversight of virtually everything the government is doing. It's just a more grotesque, partisan public version of it. But it will be a huge responsibility and a real test of Democrats to fold in and not try to settle scores and not try to relitigate these partisan fights over recent years and forge a new model, a new model that is actually the old model that has served us well and helped us survive unstable presidencies and chaotic periods of our history before. So that, to me, the most urgent problem is Congress coming back into in providing some adult supervision of what's going on in Washington.
I would just say, too, just to build on that, in addition to that, right after this 2018 election, the 2020 campaign begins for president. Whoever the next presidential candidate is on the Democratic side has to speak to the things that Shayla is talking about, has to speak to what our country is and who we are and to unify us. And as we were talking earlier, I think the person that will be successful on the Democratic side is somebody who is the antidote to the division and to the ripping apart of the nation and the nation's institutions that is the current president.
Next question, and while you come to the microphone, let me point out to those of you who are Democrats and listening to Governor Granholm and thinking she'd be a good candidate. She was born in Canada.
And was brought here when I was 4. Is that a Canadian? There's a Canadian in there. I knew I liked that row over there.
All right, thank you all for coming out today. It's been a pleasure being able to talk with you all day. And my question is, so I'm worried in 2018 and 2020 that we're going to operate under this assumption that all Americans have the same information about everything that's going on in the headlines today. But there was a really interesting Vox article that said that even though Mueller has 17 indictments and 5 guilty pleas, 60% of Americans have no idea about that, and they don't think Mueller's actually found anything. And I think that's a very interesting insight into the American people. And regardless of the results of the election, the 2016 election show that there is a deep, deep divide in the American people, and we need to go back into fighting for American principles. So my question is, when we're approaching these elections, instead of going us versus Trump, what is a better strategy to kind of more focus on these people who feel like they've been forgotten and don't have a place in America anymore?
Murphy?
Oh, that's simple. Start with the Republican platform. No, look, I do believe if you take the current unpleasantness out of the equation, the biggest problem we have in American politics, and I don't quite go to the poll show nobody knows anything, because people have the right to not know anything. So I don't go. We're gonna have a department of mandatory broccoli eating and policy stories on the front page of every newspaper. But this is true. We have had a long and successful social contract where we promised people the American dream, and it was achievable. We had good public schools. We had the ability to move up. We had reasonable wages for labor. If you look at what your labor buys you in real dollars, most people are working the same amount or more for less stuff over the last 20 years. And so that has caused all kinds of problems where it is harder for the social contract based on a decent life to exist. And when people are pissed off economically, on the right, they vote grievance, and on the left, they vote grievance. And to make it worse, they vote stupid grievance. Simple, stupid grievance. Whether it's, we're going to raid Wall Street, take all the money, so you can get that PhD in candle making for free, because nobody should have a profit, or we're going to arrest all the Mexicans because they're tunneling in to take your jobs and rape everybody. So here we are. So the question is, we've got to get that social contract back, and it's a problem bigger than politics. Ultimately, politics is the tail on a very big, important dog. And we just have to look at our society, at pop culture, at the way we communicate, at the whole idea of civility. We have to look from my right-wing nut, probably at the monopoly the public employee unions have of the education system, which is more about the teachers than the kids. There are huge reforms we have to make. And until we do that, politics is going to be what we got. That's my upbeat little speech there.
Hi there. Thank you all for being here. So I'm registered in Illinois 6th, but also have roots in Wisconsin 7th, so largely suburban and rural districts. And something I've noticed, at least in the primaries, at least on the Democratic side, is that a big galvanizing factor amongst first-time candidates seems to be the issue of healthcare. And I was wondering if that's an observation that you've seen across the board and amongst these new candidates who maybe hadn't seen themselves running prior to 2016, and how, should the Democrats take the House, that would translate into a legislative agenda.
Kind of a big question because there are differences about that. But Jennifer, you want to?
Yeah, I just think it's a huge, personal, deep issue across this country. I think, when Bernie Sanders compares us to other nations, well, a lot of times people don't like to compare the U.S. to other nations because we are exceptional. In this way, we are exceptional too, but not in a good sense. And I think for individuals, there's nothing more important than your children's, your parents, your brothers and sisters' health, right? I mean, what else, economics is super important too, but this is like a fundamental existential question, literally. So I look at the race in Pennsylvania when Conor Lamb won, and he did not run on Trump. He ran on the opioid crisis in that district, and his closing ad to camera was showing a clip of what his opponent, Rick Saccone, had said to a mom whose daughter had died of an opioid overdose, and said, what are we going to do about the opioid crisis? This is so fundamental, which is, of course, related to the health issue you're asking about. And Rick Saccone said, look, everybody's asking me this. We just don't have the money, okay? And that sort of notion of we don't have the money, so therefore we're not going to address it, as opposed to being creative about how we address it, is a fundamental issue. And yes, I think it will be important across districts across this country.
Larry, this issue of and by the way, we should point out just a little plug for AKPD Media and Message, which I was associated with at one time, but no longer.
That's the A.
did that race.
You did that race?
Mike Donlin
awesome.
and Larry. So,
yeah.
But the single-payer issue, which is very much a debate within the Democratic Party, how is that playing out?
I think that there's a lot of pressure from the progressive wing of the party to embrace single payer. I also think there's a lot of evidence that it's an efficient way to deliver health care. However, I don't think that we're the concern that we had earlier in the year that the candidates were going to get pinned down to sort of the ideological issues like this has not really materialized the way we expected. I think that people want to win, and I think that people are not, even our activists are not demanding that candidates pass litmus tests to the extent we thought they would. So I think that there are going to be a lot of candidates who get elected who would like to get there and move in that direction. I don't think that we're going to have an army of candidates who are unbendingly committed to that, next week.
I'm getting the flashing red lights. Does that mean one more question or not one more question?
Thank you.
We're going to make it one more question.
LCU, class of 98. I haven't been back to Chicago for 20 years. I haven't been back to America for 10 years. I have a burning question when I come back to this school, and I wanted to discuss with my friends. Because I have this opportunity, I'm going to shoot this question to you panelists. My question is specifically addressed to Mr. Murphy, and that is this. Why do we have so many Trump enablers? I don't want to discuss about Trumps. I wanted to discuss why are there so many Trump enablers in Congress specifically? I don't know what the answer is, but the follow-up question is this. If there are so many Trump enablers in Congress, should we not ask ourselves the question, is Congress failing its constitutional duty? Has Congress itself become dysfunctional?
Yes. Shoot was the appropriate verb. They're afraid of their primary voters who like Trump. It's a marketplace, just like Democrats were afraid of their primary voters who like Clinton after his scandals. So when the politics change, then the people who reflect the marketplace change. So if you guys don't like the Republican Party, start voting in Republican primaries.
Sorry, I think it's kind of a cheap shot that we're trying to compare the Clintonian situation because two wrong does not make one right, does it?
I agree with that. But there's a certain Trump sins, and I am one of very few Republicans who has managed to destroy most of my Republican career by being very vocal about this. So I've got skin in the game. But there is a certain holiness about it. And his outrages are so big, I get that. And they're not the same. But the pattern of party tribal loyalty against bad behavior is nothing new. And if you want to, when voters start punishing people for it within a party, then it'll change. It's an open system. You know, we're the only large Western democracy that's really is primary voter obsessed. Most choose with smaller groups or even those smoke-filled rooms. I'm for bringing that back. It's a more rational decision.
Well,
but look,
right
if Mueller
city.
comes back with impeachable offenses, there will be a great moral test of rule of law, and we'll find out.
Well, I thank you very much. I have to take a moment just to say how blessed we are to have these, how many of you? 5 here, and a bunch of other incredible people who sat around a table today to help us lay plans for the future of the Institute of Politics, who are there for us all the time. Each of them has been in some form or fashion. A couple of fellows here who are at the Institute of Politics. And we have these kinds of conversations almost on a daily basis across the political spectrum, across the array of issues. And it happens because of the generosity of people like this. So I just wanted to publicly express my appreciation to you. I want to, and give me a hand, will you?
And you're not so bad yourself.
I want to give another shout out to the students. Andrew, who introduced us, is the junior chair of our student advisory board. Our senior chair and one of our board members asked questions here. It is an unbelievable experience to spend time with these young people every day. And if you get depressed about the future, then come and spend some time with us and you'll feel better about it. So we're grateful for that opportunity. And some of our staff is here as well, who, as I said earlier to these guys, they're not workers, they're not staff, really, they're missionaries. And they approach their jobs that way. And for all you folks who are committed to this university, I want you to know what the Institute of Politics is about, and support us, talk us up, because I think those of you who remember the university before it know that we've added something that wasn't here before. So thank you very much.
Thank you.